Welcome to Marcos and James, the Lisbon Pirates podcast. Good morning, Tiago.
Good morning, Marcus. How are you?
I'm good. I'm
Yes.
doing good this morning.
Yes.
Yeah, we've avoided the rainy times here in Lisbon, and it's sunny and beautiful, and we're enjoying our great city.
Yes.
So let's jump right in.
Yes.
Let's jump right
Let's
in.
go.
Something exciting happened to you this week,
Yeah, oh man.
and
yes.
maybe I wouldn't say exciting.
Yeah.
A little scary. Perhaps.
Yes. It's something that I guess this comes from my education, but so I'm that type of person who has guilt problems
Yeah.
with the idea of how do you say of not eating everything.
Yeah, wasting things, wasting food.
Yeah, wasting food.
Yeah.
And so this past Tuesday, there was some food that leftovers from
leftovers
Sunday
from
because
Sunday.
we
Yeah.
on Sundays generally there's people eating, having lunch
Right.
in church, and so it's usual that we get some leftovers, and so I ate these mushrooms.
Right.
This
So
past Tuesday,
leftover
man.
mushrooms.
Yes, yeah, leftover
Mushrooms from
Bad
Sunday.
Bad idea. Don't do that, guys. Listeners, don't do that. Don't eat left. How would you say
Leftover
leftover?
food.
Yeah, leftover mushrooms.
And especially leftover mushrooms.
And so I was here trying to work, and Maria, my oldest daughter, my oldest kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, my oldest kid, she was working with me. So she was studying, and both of us, we thought we were going to die.
thought you were gonna
because
die,
of,
yeah.
because of those mushrooms.
Yeah, and so I mean, it affected you pretty quickly, right?
Yes.
You guys got sick.
Yes. In 1 hour, I was throwing up.
Oh, yeah.
I was throwing up here at this beloved church of ours.
And you immediately knew it was the mushrooms.
Yeah,
without
I
a doubt.
immediately knew. And so, and Ruth.
And here's the funny part. I think this is the funny part. When Ruth your wife was telling us yesterday what happened, the hilarious part was she sent you food. She sent food with you.
Yeah.
So it's
True,
not like
true.
it's not like you came to the church and there was nothing to eat.
It's guilt management. This is my dad's fault because he passed on to me, this thing about never wasting food, food. And so, but sometimes things just work pretty bad.
Yeah,
Yes.
sometimes we just need to throw it out, right?
Yes.
Especially old mushrooms. And to make it even worse, I think the food we had eaten the food on Sunday afternoon, and then probably had sat out for maybe an hour or two.
Yes, I don't know.
And then maybe got put back in the fridge.
Yes.
So at that point, I think when you ate it on Tuesday, but it didn't smell bad, right? When you opened it
No,
up?
it didn't, because I smelled it and it smelled good.
Yeah. And then it hit you.
But don't trust mushrooms.
Don't trust mushrooms.
Yeah, don't trust mushrooms. And I love mushrooms. That's
Right.
the problem. Yes,
Yeah.
don't trust them.
So there's like 2 rules. One rule is never eat a wild mushroom. Do you know that rule?
Yes.
And
And,
then
I never did that.
And then the second rule is don't eat a mushroom at the church after it's been sitting out.
So if you're listening to us, destroy all
Just
mushrooms.
throw 'em out.
Yeah, surviving in your church.
Yeah.
Destroy them.
Oh, crazy.
God's word for you. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, what an ordeal.
Yes.
But you guys are okay now. Everybody's feeling well.
Yes. At the end of the day, I was feeling all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Already all right.
Good. Well, this morning we're going to kind of talk about something that's kind of related to the big mushroom experience, right?
Yes.
Because you got sick and you felt like you're going to die.
Yes.
And so, what are we going to talk about this morning?
Yes. Our theme is you're gonna die. You're gonna die.
It's very morbid this
Yes.
morning as we're.
And there's a context, because yesterday we are recording these Thursdays. Today is
Thursday.
Thursday.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yesterday, Wednesday, I was in this anti-euthanasia event. And so if you're thinking about euthanasia, of course, you're thinking a lot about death. And one of the things that really struck me,
Touched me or struck me.
Yeah, struck me.
Right.
Exactly. It's this very simple fact that we keep on trying to forget that we're all going to die. We're all
Absolutely.
going to die, and
We were born to die.
yes, and you know, the early Christians and even the monks,
Mhm.
the old monks, it was a discipline, a daily discipline. They always thought about, they always spent some time during their days thinking about death.
Mm.
And it was called in Latin memento mori,
Yeah.
the moment you think about
Right.
dying.
Right.
And Mark, I just want for us to talk a little bit
Yeah.
about this, because in a way I think that probably because we always want to feel we always want to feel good about ourselves in the ways that we try to share the gospel, and all this trying to look for some winsome style
Right.
of
Right.
preaching the gospel. Are we lacking the death element in our gospel preaching? What do you think
Yeah,
about that?
absolutely. I absolutely think that's a lacking part of how we talk about the gospel, or even how we present the gospel. I think that, unfortunately, a lot of our gospel presentation reflects what's happening in culture.
Yes.
And wouldn't you agree that even in our culture today, and I think we could talk about any Western culture, there's this attempt to almost escape death.
Yes.
And so everything that we do, whether it's health and beauty or trying to prolong life, is kind of centered around this idea that we're going to live forever, or that death will never happen to me.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's fascinating to see this even influence and affect even our gospel understanding, and then realize we need to go back to what the Bible teaches about death and how the gospel then influences what we talk about and think about.
Have you ever lived some kind of experience that you really thought you were going to die?
Oh, absolutely.
So please tell
Okay,
us.
so yeah, I'll tell this quickly, but one of the most recent times when I thought I was going to just absolutely die was we had traveled to India to go visit my brother-in-law, and my brother-in-law is an avid surfer, and I am not. I've tried many times. I'm just no good at it. I can't do it.
It's funny because generally people will not think about India as a surfing place,
Right,
but
right.
you can surf there.
You can surf there, yeah. So he lived at that moment right on the water, and so he was able to surf. And so we went and visited him. He said, "Mark, I'm going to take you out to surf." And I said, "David, we just got off the plane. I mean, we were tired. We had flown all the way from Portugal through London. It had been a long trip." I said, "I'm so tired." He says, No, we got to go. We got to go." And so we went, and he took me out there, and it was monsoon season, which is not a good idea to surf during monsoon season because the waves are huge and they're choppy and it's really hard. So we got out there, and he only had one surfboard, which is another bad idea. So we're out there, we're trying to surf and stuff, and he gets me going on a couple of waves, and and then he says, I'm going to take one. And so there I am treading water in the Indian Ocean, and the waves are coming, and I'm tired, and I'm physically exhausted. And I literally, like, I'm fighting. I mean, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, David had already caught a wave in, and so he had gone. And so here I am sitting there. I'm like way away from the shore. The current is so strong that I can't even get in.
Yes.
And so I'm fighting. I'm at the point where, have you ever been so exhausted in the water that you just have to flip over on your back and like try to conserve energy?
Fortunately,
and I thought,
never happened.
I've traveled all the way to India and I'm going to die here.
And you really did think that?
I absolutely did. I thought, this is it.
And how did it end? Because you're here.
Well, I'm here.
You survived.
So I flipped on my back and tried as best as I can not to fight. And so what I did was I let the current take me where it wanted to take me. And it literally took me maybe 1.5 kilometers down the shore. Yeah. And eventually I was able to kind of catch a wave to push me back into shore. But when I got onto shore, it literally was, remember Jonah being spit out of the whale?
Yes.
I'm sure, just laying there going, oh my goodness, I'm alive.
Yes.
And literally that's what it was, just feeling like I couldn't believe it.
What did you say to your brother-in-law?
I about killed him.
Did you kill him?
I said, don't ever do that to me again. He goes, what? What happened? I said, I've been fighting for 30 minutes trying to survive.
There's something I'm thinking about listening to you, listening to your story. Do you agree that probably for some of us, we will only think about death in times of peril?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's like fear had the monopoly of making us think about death.
Yeah.
Do you think that, as Christians, we should think about death in other occasions that we are not fearing for our
Yeah,
lives. What do you think
absolutely.
about
And I
that?
think that maybe that's one of the big differences between like a first century Christian and Christians today, is that in some good ways our societies have advanced, and so it's safer, and there's not as many dangers that we encounter day to day. And because of that, we've kind of insulated ourselves from any type of death or thinking about death. And so when tragedy does happen, it's a shock. It's not an expected reality of just what this life is. And so I think one of the things that we really do need to do is recapture this idea of thinking about death outside of those times where we're in complete danger.
Yes.
But isn't that seems somewhat countercultural or counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes. That's why when we think about, when we remember those old Christians, a way of daily trying to think about death, it like you were saying, it sounds strange for us because death for us probably it only comes to our minds when we are simply completely afraid of dying.
Exactly.
And so having a discipline about thinking about death, having that kind of discipline in any kind of day, it really it's a paradox, but it can be very uplifting for your day, because you're not expecting you're not expecting to be scared, to thinking about the most universal fact about existence. That you're gonna die.
And I even think beyond that, the gospel demands that we think about death, because when you think about what the gospel is, at the core of the gospel, it really truly is about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And so when we think about that, and it's bearing on us as believers, or even it's bearing on others who are not believers, we actually are a very peculiar people in that we talk about death.
Yes.
And maybe that's when we're presenting the gospel, that would be the first thing that we'd be talking about is, let me talk to you about death. Which, I don't think there's very many people that start a gospel conversation about death. But it's interesting because I think the gospel demands that we start there, because at the core of the gospel, we're exposed with who we really are and the death of our true self in order to follow Jesus, which, if that makes sense.
And I really think that probably it's a big mistake thinking that if you're putting death inside the faith conversation, you're scaring people, you're manipulating. And it can be really the opposite, because you're putting the most universal fact about existence where it should be. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that for you to talk about Christ, you always have to go a particular way of. First of all, you're going to die. I'm not saying that you should do that, but if it becomes such a pattern that in every time you're talking about faith, the death thing never gets in. So it's there that you're just misleading people. Because you're not talking about something that for sure is going to happen. For sure.
And I think that's unfortunately the tendency is in our culture, is that we would want to avoid any type of death conversation. And whether it's death in the gospel or death in our own lives, it's become almost what you've described as a taboo subject. Is that right?
Yes. And let me tell you this, because yesterday when I was hearing some people in that anti-euthanasia event, it was a great event. Jorge Humberto, he was the president of Evangelical Alliance in Portugal, and Paulo Pedro Luvumba is a pastor, a friend of ours. They were the guys that that made that work. And in that event, there was this great Catholic doctor, Dr. Margarida Neto. And she said this, that death replaced sex. Death replaced sex as a taboo in our society. And I was thinking, spot on. It's true. Right now, you are kind of obligated to spend your life talking every minute about sex,
Right.
because that means that you're a very enlightened person. But death, yes, it's morbid. You shouldn't talk about death. So yes, death replaced sex as a taboo for us, and even in our churches, if you talk about death, it's like, oh, you're a sick person,
Right.
talking, scaring people to death, so that you can get religion. And man, one of the things that I was thinking is, yes, we are running from reality,
Right.
because every one of us is going to die.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And if you're not talking about that, you're just talking about other things which can be important, but you're just making secondary things the primary ones. And I was thinking about that. And people who think about death, generally they live better than people who don't think about death.
Yeah, because when people don't think about death, they do everything in their power to prevent it.
Yes.
And that would even
Yes.
probably even kind of mold into the euthanasia conversation as well, right?
Yes.
That all of what we're doing to prevent death. And then I think that's the ironic thing, is when we talk about euthanasia, then all of a sudden you have the conversation where people are saying we have the right to decide, even in death, how we should live, which isn't that just taking our own identity to the maximum? I mean, just trying to say we control everything from life to death and everything in between.
Yes.
Which is extremely counter or against the biblical message, isn't it?
Yes. And do you know what one, I don't remember who said this, but even right now, they were giving some example of our death taboo, and they were saying we try to, even about funerals, our kids growing up without ever going to funerals. And so this was something that I wanted to ask you about. What do you think about that? Have you ever took your kids to have you ever take your kids to a funeral?
That's a good question. No, I'm pretty sure I haven't.
I have.
to a stranger's funeral?
No, to a
or a family member?
I don't remember, because of course, and we both of us are pastors here at Igreja da Lapa. You are pastor since the last January, and since last January there were no funerals.
Yeah, exactly.
But I remember the first year I got here to Lapa, I had at least 3 funerals. It was very quick getting here and having
those.
The very first week.
Yeah.
I had a funeral, Irmã Manuela, and I don't know if our kids went to some of this, but 2 years ago, my aunt Tia Ruth, she died, and we brought the kids, and we really think they have to deal with that. So
here in Portugal, it's so fascinating. Do they have the tradition of viewing the body before it's buried, or is that American?
It will depend, because you can go to some funerals and have the open casket, so you can go there and look at the person who died. And you can have the other way, so closed casket.
A mix then.
I would say that probably the older people, they are more prone to go and want to
see the body.
See
actually,
the body.
Yeah. And younger people probably not so much.
Yes, I believe they. Right. But I remember when it was my aunt's funeral, I believe that there was some people went to look. Okay. I remember. I don't know if I went to look or if I was near when someone did. Yes, but that can happen. So
what do you think then are the benefits as a believer, as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus? What are the benefits to thinking deeply about death and being confronted with that reality?
Yes. In a way, it's do you use the expression realism?
Yeah.
In a way, it's getting a grip on things.
Yeah.
So it's about you understanding life, and for us as fathers and mothers. I remember what happened to you in India. There was a similar thing when we were spending some vacation some years ago in Algarve with a old lady that was struggling
really?
to get. And so you had the beach. We were spending some vacation in Cabanas de Vira,
Yeah.
near Tavira in Algarve, and the whole beach was just
bet.
watching and how do you say Nadador
The
Salvador?
lifeguard went
The
out and saved
lifeguard
her.
went out, and I remember the kids were there,
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and we didn't, and we let them
Mm-hmm.
understand what was going
Yeah.
on. And I don't want to go morbid on this because, of course, I really think that any family should think about this and do the way that they believe they should do. But for us, if we are teaching our kids about God, and if we are teaching our kids about what life is, yes, they have to know.
Yeah,
They have to know
absolutely.
what
Yeah.
life is, and
Yeah.
and they have to. I really think that it's healthier for them because
To
I've
have a
been.
good grasp on
Yes.
what life and death is, and,
Yes.
and what naturally happens to us as humans.
And tell me, try to put yourself in this young kid's position. And what did you think about even your parents about all these things? Would you? I want to know your
Well,
opinion.
this is, I think, what you said earlier about quoting the doctor that talked about the taboo being
Yeah.
replaced.
Margarida Neto.
Yeah, because if I remember, like back in my childhood, sex was a taboo. You did not talk about it. But what that does is it creates an unhealthy balance.
Yes.
And so you either become
Yes.
obsessed with it,
Yes.
or you act like it doesn't exist.
Yes.
And then later, when you grow up and sex is a
Yes.
reality in a marriage relationship, then you have that baggage because of it being a taboo in your life. So you're either like obsessed with it, or you have problems relating to your wife or your husband, whoever it is. And so when you think about death in that way, it's almost the same thing as if we're shielded from death and understanding its purpose and its really true biblical meaning. Then what happens is, later when we actually encounter, and I think naturally as we get older, we encounter death more and more. Maybe as a young child we don't encounter it as much, but when our uncles or our grandfather or grandmother or those people we love or an accident happens or whatever,
Yes.
all of a sudden as an adult we're confronted with death, we don't know how to deal with it
Yes.
because we've never been exposed to it, right? And so it's fascinating to me to see how, like you talked about, having that taboo about death now is creating generations of people that are not equipped to deal with the realities of life and death.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I love funerals. In a way, I love funerals. I was preaching this 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was saying I really love funerals. Let me explain this. In terms that it's when things are difficult that you can see probably in a more clear way what you really believe
yeah,
about
that's true.
life. And so we are Christians. When you get to a funeral, or you really believe everything the Bible says about resurrection, or you are going to kind of make an escape, a poetic escape about life. And so for me as a pastor in funerals, it's that time I really believe, and every little thing expresses our belief about resurrection.
Right.
Even the burying thing. That's why I of course I've been in funerals where the person who died wanted to be cremated.
Right.
And of course I have to respect that. But even about this cremation issue, it's not the right way of making a choreography about what happens.
Exactly.
That's why Jews and Christians knew that you have to bury.
Yeah.
Not of course, it's not because of you will have a new resurrection body. Of course, you are not dependent on your body, your this life body, but it's a symbol about. It's like sowing a plant.
Right.
So
Exactly.
you bury the thing. So every little aspect of a Christian funeral expresses what we believe
Yeah.
about life and death.
Yeah.
And that's precious, man.
Absolutely.
That's precious.
And I would say one of the difficulties, and I don't want to judge anybody or what they think or want to do, but I think that would be one of my questions about cremation and then keeping the ashes,
Yes.
because doesn't it kind of project this idea that we can keep this person with us
Yes.
forever?
Yes. It's and I want to be fair because I understand, and I've made some funerals that people wanted to
Sure.
be cremated, and people know here in church if they want to be cremated. I'm not the one who's going to stand up against that, but I don't think it's the right way of doing it. It's not. There's a better way. I really believe there's a better way, and that's why I believe in burying. Because I really believe that the popularity of cremation has to do with a culture running away from death.
Exactly.
And so, yes,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you were saying.
Yeah. And the idea you can keep that person
Yes.
with you, or
Yes.
the presence of that
Yes.
person, which
And-
we don't believe in at all.
Yes, and even when you go and spread the ashes in the ocean or something like that, there's an idea lurking there of, in a way, you're getting the people back to the universe, or
Right.
it's a very Oriental thing,
is,
and
it
it's
is.
not what Christianity believes, and we should think about that. And I really believe, and this is something I read in a Tim Keller book, Tim Keller's book. It's not. It comes from a Polish guy. I don't remember his name. It's not Miroslav Wolf. Keller quotes Wolf a lot, but it's not Wolf. But he said that contrarily, how do you say? Contrary to
Yeah,
what generally
contrary to
yes,
popular belief.
yes, the popular belief, religion is not the opium of the masses,
Right.
like Marx said. Believing that you can live the way you want to and never have to, how do you say, be accountable
Yeah.
about that.
Deal with the consequences,
Yes,
right?
that's what the actual opium of the masses is.
Right.
So, and I really believe. What do you think about
Absolutely,
this?
yeah. That's such a great way to put it, because it reorients where we believe in, what we, just kind of what, where we put death and where we collect that and stuff. And I think it's fascinating because I think I mentioned this before, but this idea that we're in control of everything from life to death and beyond. And I think maybe what Keller is getting at is that idea is the opiate of the masses.
Yes.
That idea is the central
Yes.
figure to us thinking that we have control and even authorization, or that we're so powerful that we can decide what happens every step of the way up until even death and through death.
And because today we want to make things quicker, but let me just make you a last question. What should be the place of death in our preaching of the gospel, Mark? You're a gospel preacher.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I think it should be couched in the understanding of Jesus' death and resurrection.
Yes.
And so I think that we don't become obsessed with death because Jesus rose again. And so we believe in the resurrection. We believe in the hope of the resurrection. But at the same time, we don't ignore it, because we realize that not only do we point people to the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus, but by reflection, that's what's happened. That's like you said, the choreography of our lives is that as well, that we are buried in Christ. We are raised in the likeness of new life. And so that spiritually is exactly what happens to us when we come to faith, is that we literally die to ourselves and to that old sinful nature. And God, by his just mercy and grace, makes us alive in Christ. And so I think to avoid death would be grave. It'd be with such great consequence to our soul, because that's not, death plays a part of how we see the gospel at work. But then also to be careful not to overemphasize it, because we believe in a resurrected Lord.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
No, you're being completely Christ-centered, because our way of living it depends totally on Christ.
Yeah.
I would just add one thing that it really worries me about some kind of popular evangelical culture that that's so obsessed with always wanting to sound positive.
Yes. Yes.
And
Exactly.
right now, I just feel, I really feel worried about even people who are thinking that if um, if you have a message about Christ, completely positive,
Yeah.
that doesn't have to deal with death, there's a kind of, at least that's my opinion, this kind of arrogance, because you don't know. The Bible tells a lot about death, but there's a lot that we don't know about death.
Right.
And if suddenly, because you want to feel positive, you don't go talking about death, you can be really, really be misleading people in terms of unpreparing them for what they really should be prepared.
Yeah.
And I really think that we really should think about that. We really should think about, I'm preaching Christ. The more important thing is the thing that you talked about. This is about Christ, so I have all Christ's categories for me to think about my own life and my own death, and that's why I can be talking about death with hope because of Christ. But I should take some consequences out of this in terms of what will happen to everyone, not that are not trusting on Christ about this. And yes, I don't know. I want to sound encouraging.
Yeah.
But
and I think that's maybe that ironic part of the gospel message is that we want to be encouraging, and so we talk about death.
Yes, it's the paradox.
We want to equip people to understand this life, and so we talk about the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so, in the midst of what would be counterintuitive, we truthfully find our hope, because we find anchored in that is our life in Christ.
Yes.
And so it seems like, and I think the Apostle Paul even mentioned this, it seems like craziness. It seems like this is ludicrous. It seems like people will say it's crazy and it's a stumbling block for the Jews, and the Gentiles think we're nuts, But at the same time, when we really look at this, we find that Jesus is really truly the answer in this, that our death but also our resurrection, just like he did on the cross. So
I love to draw skulls, so it's something from my teenage years. But as a Christian, I love to draw skulls. Skulls always belong to a popular Christian artistic manifestations. So you have lots of figures of people holding skulls, but we can draw skulls in a very happy and hopeful way.
Well, don't you always put flowers around it inside?
Yeah, generally I do that.
So it's kind of
yes.
Yeah. Well, there you go. You have it. Here on the podcast, we're encouraging you to think deeply about death and what it means.
Yes.
Not only in your life, but in the context of Jesus Christ. So, well. Like we always do, we want to wrap up and say that you're welcome to come to Lapa, 11:30s on Sundays.
Yes.
And we'd love to have you. So stop by Lapa. We'd love to see you here.
Come, please come.